Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. What's the why behind our actions? From an evolutionary perspective, many are just dialed in at the subconscious level, yet we address this often with behavioral science in looking at the things like conversion rate optimization, leadership, and sales techniques. But when looking deeper to evolutionary psychology, can you take that knowledge and level the playing field, if you will, with these techniques to help you become better with relationships, communities, as well as with self-knowledge? What would you do if you knew how to unleash your primal brain? Tim Ash is an acknowledged authority on evolutionary psychology and digital marketing, an international keynote speaker, a best-selling author of landing page optimization, and his newest book, Unleash Your Primal Brain. And on this episode, we'll discuss evolutionary psychology, behavioral science, touching different parts of the proverbial elephant, landing page optimization, the prism of culture values, tribes, herd mentality, conformity and integrity, the former Soviet Union, and a lot more. So let's tune in to an evolutionary psychology expert with a shark who continues to evolve on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Wow. Well, okay. So I was born in the former Soviet Union, emigrated here when I was a kid with my family, moved around to different places, and came out to California on the beach to go to UC San Diego. Stayed there for grad school, and then that was in, I guess, what you'd call artificial intelligence or machine learning. And, so I always had an interest in the brain and psychology, and then had a long professional run of essentially being an entrepreneur and running a digital agency. We work with Facebooks and Googles and Nestle's of the world on down to smaller, nimble companies, and created 1.2 billion in value that we can document from those efforts. Along, written a couple of books, as you know, on landing page optimization. That's kind of the Bible in the field. Yeah. And ran a conference series called Conversion Conference, which is now renamed Digital Growth Unleashed here and in Europe for 10 years. These days, I'm mostly doing keynote speaking all over the world, some marketing consulting, and focusing on the launch of my latest book, Unleash Your Primal Brain.
Awesome. So what part of the Soviet Union?
In Moscow. Yeah.
Moscow,
so
okay.
I was born there, and I've been back 4 or 5 times in the intervening decades. It's certainly changed the last.
It's a little bit different weather from San Diego, so.
Well, yeah, I don't like to go in the winter time. There's 2 seasons in Moscow, July and winter.
Yeah, really. So let's talk a little bit about this book. I mean, I've read your earlier book, and this was a nice pivot, Unleash Your Primal Brain. What is the premise for writing this book? Why the shift from a CRO book, basically, with landing page optimization, to a lot of behavioral science type stuff that you cover in here?
Well, I'd say it goes even beyond the behavioral science. Let me kind of give you a little more extended version of the backstory. So, like I said, we've worked with top companies all over the world, made a lot of money for them, and the focus has been on conversion rate optimization, how to make websites more effective. And to do that, you need to kind of create instant trust to persuade people in a matter of seconds. So we kind of battle tested the things that actually work on the ground. And in terms of how to persuade people. Now, our own clients use that ethically, but there are a lot of companies out there that don't, the large corporations, governments, and, this evolutionary psychology stuff can be used to create discord, manipulation, suck money out of our wallets. And I just feel like it was an uneven playing field. When you're talking about that, it's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Consumers are screwed when these giant companies are strip mining them for value by having these really, really sophisticated algorithms and essentially propaganda techniques. And that shatters our politics, our economies, our sense of what unites us. So I wanted to kind of level the playing field. So my real mission with this book is to give that same knowledge of how we really work and what makes us tick to ordinary people, to everyone. I mean, yeah, it can be used for improving businesses, leadership, marketing, sales, persuasion, but also for relationships and communities and self-knowledge. So my real goal is to kind of give you the field manual, being human 101, if you will.
Well, and I think it also helps marketers and business leaders to read a book like this to understand the power they have. There are a lot of people that apply these techniques that they've Googled, but don't
Yeah,
necessarily
yeah,
know the
that's a
power
good
of it,
point.
you know?
Yeah.
It
So
helps make a marketer or a business leader more ethical as well to really
yeah, and,
understand what they're
it's
doing.
foundational. This is really, I think, the first time in a non-technical way that the why behind our evolutionary psychology has been brought together. My problem as a marketer or practitioner of this was that everyone's in their own little silos, whether it's behavioral economics or public policy or changing your habits or medical imaging. Everyone's got like their own view of touching the proverbial elephant in different parts, and no one's seeing the elephant. And that's how did we get here is based on evolution. So you have to retrace the arc of evolution to understand it. So anyone who's a marketer that doesn't understand how the brain really works, and they're just trying all kinds of technical tactics and tricks, they're not going to have a very successful career. I can tell you that.
Yeah, but that's what they teach at every conference. It's
Yeah, exactly.
Instagram
Here's your
hacks.
cheat sheet. Here's your swipe file, right?
Yeah.
Here's like your shortcut to do it. Never mind understanding human beings, right?
Yeah. Well, I worry about the customer, the end customer. That's just such a waste of time. Just kidding. But
Right.
so how do you define what is the primal brain?
Well, the best way to think about it is that let's call it the brain that doesn't have access to language. You can essentially think of evolution as being a Band-Aid on top of a fix, on top of a kludge. So we have this early stuff that we share with insects and then reptiles, and then stuff that we share with mammals and warm-blooded creatures, and then things that make us uniquely human. So you have to kind of understand that whole arc. And what most people think of as the reasoning brain or the logical brain, that's relatively late addition, and it's not really there for reasoning. It's actually for mapping out all of our social dynamics in larger groups. But it's a byproduct. I think a few people use it to create microwave ovens and things like that. But basically, anything that's sub-language, emotions, intuition, automatic reflexes, 95% of what we do is happening at that level. And anytime we open our mouth to describe how we think, that's an after the fact rationalization.
Well, one of the things too that I think about, because I often speak about behavioral science at conferences, landing page optimization tips and tricks and all that wonderful stuff. And I've read so many great books, including this one, about how the brain works. I'm sure we're friends with a lot of the same people that we talked about beforehand anyway that speak to this as well. I struggle sometimes though when thinking about how to regulate my conscious brain to override my subconscious, because it's one of the things, like, for example, you wrote this to help sort of level the playing field. At some point though, a lot of my subconscious still kicks back in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we can take, yeah, absolutely. So I didn't say that this is going to solve all the world's ills. My point is just the opposite.
What does it do for global warming and poverty and everything else? Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Right. And, political divisions. No, I mean, I have a lot of insights about all of that, actually. But to be clear, the book is not a pie. It's not about neuromarketing. Okay, it can be used by anybody.
Absolutely.
To understand how the brain works. But as part of that, things like culture and language and tribal beliefs and everything like that are a huge part of our distinctly human portion of it.
I need to refer to it more as brain science than behavioral science. That would probably help a little bit. How do you refer to it then?
Well, I think of it as evolutionary psychology, understanding how we behave based on an evolutionary background. That's really the red thread through the whole book. See, the problem was that there's a lot of specialists and they're all in their little silos talking in their little jargon and not connecting with the dots. To me, this is about the why, and the why is because we evolve through a set of certain environments, and these early things still are in there because they work for all life forms, and the later stuff's uniquely human. So you got to understand the whole arc.
Well, describe then how the conscious and the unconscious sort of battle as we go through making these sort of decisions, and what your research uncovered.
Okay, well, so think of it this way. Grossly speaking, there's a bunch of automatic responses. If you burn your hand on a hot stove, you're going to pull it away. That's not like, what's that odd smell of burning flesh emanating from my fingertips? It's not like we're going to think about it, right? You just do it. You pull your hand away. So there's automatic stuff. Then there's like the emotional learned responses. If something helps us survive, we attach a positive emotion to it and we want to repeat it. If it goes against our survival, we experience it as pain or negative stuff, and we try to remember it and not repeat it and run away from it. So there's kind of those layers to it. And then there's the distinctly human, which is understanding in a very nuanced way the social dynamics. We're very cooperative creatures, the most cooperative on the planet. And that's at the heart of that is things like culture and communicating our tribal values and behaviors to each other subconsciously.
You mentioned language earlier, and I'd like to jump a little further into chapter 16. Unpack, if you will, how we look at language and storytelling.
Mm. Yeah, so language and storytelling, from an evolutionary perspective, again, has two important roles. Um, the first is to, of course, communicate culture and information. And there's evidence that when language really took off, which was not 200,000 years ago, like our basic species level stuff, but more like 70,000 years ago, culture began to accrue really fast. So when we could communicate about more than, run away or danger or things like that, when we could talk conceptually to each other. So it's to facilitate culture spread. That's one of its functions. The other is simulation. It's a way to, if I tell you a story, like I know there's a famous one, story about Sophie's Choice, Oscar-winning movie, and she had to decide which of her two children was going to get gassed in the gas chambers and which one she was going to save, right? And horrible choice. And so nobody wants to make that choice, but by watching a movie like that, we vicariously experience it. So in effect, it's training or simulation without the negative side effects or the cost. Okay. And then the third function of story is, well, I already said it, not only just to spread cultural knowledge, but to reinforce tribalism. In other words, by telling certain stories, we're reinforcing certain values. The example I use in the book is, let's say I told you a story about a matador who deftly sidesteps with his cape and plunges the sword into the shoulder blades of the charging bull. And so if you're in Spain, you're going to think, okay, this is about tradition. It's about the impeccable warrior training of the matador. It's about all of these noble things, bravery. And if you're working for PETA, you're going to think, well, this is just animal torture and it's being funded by a public audience and this is disgusting and should be stopped immediately. So the same objective facts told in the story very much depend on whether they reinforce our values and what our tribal beliefs are, what our cultural package is. So there's no such thing as an objective reality.
Well, or the same could be applied to whether or not we watch Fox or CNN or MSNBC.
Yeah, well, so again, if I told you that the same objective realities that children are being separated from their parents at the border and isolated, one side will say, okay, well, those people don't look like me, so that's okay, and the others would say it's inhuman and nobody should be put in those circumstances. Again, the same objective facts are being interpreted through the prism of cultural values. So that to understand humans, you need to think that our big advantage is not to be individuals. It's to have our tribe dominate against some other tribe. And so we very quickly form into tribes, and then we have to have high fidelity and adherence to the beliefs of that tribe.
Well, I'm going to jump around a little bit further then into chapter 17. I like this chapter a lot, the dance between your brains. Elaborate, if you will, the characteristics of the primal brain versus that of the conscious brain and how those basically work together.
Yeah, well, so the earlier parts are automatic for one thing. You're not even noticing that they're operating. And there's massive amounts of information impinging on you all the time. I mean, we think of the obvious stuff like noise and what's happening in our visual field, but there's also, for example, the relationship of every joint and body part inside your body. Like, how far you put your arm out. That's why you don't stick forks in your forehead when you're eating. I mean, you're aware of all of those, but that's a constant stream of information hitting you all the time. And so that automatic part is you have to really take a tiny subset of that to bring it to conscious awareness. Everything else is happening below the conscious level. And one of the things that most people don't realize is we flush most of it. The brain, the primal brain, is a forgetting machine. It can't possibly process all that information and store it and memorize it and catalog it and do anything useful with it. So it's just like, is this affecting my survival? No, 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 no. Forget, 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 forget. So the primal brain's automatic. It's making decisions emotionally, quickly. It never gets tired, and it flushes most stuff down the toilet. Whereas the effortful or conscious brain is only woken up if it's something is not dangerous or dealt with automatically. and it's new and we need to figure out, we haven't seen it before, so we don't have an emotional reaction to it yet. So that's when you wake up the kind of the more modern part of the brain, and that part gets tired easily, can be distracted and thrown off task. By the end of the day, doesn't really function. If you don't sleep, you're really screwing yourself up. So that one's kind of it helps in some situations, and is again there mostly to reason about our social relationships in the tribe.
Well, what did you learn from your research about unleashing the primal brain in regards to social thinking? I know that was covered as well in chapter 20. A little more of sort of that herd mentality with how we cover things, but elaborate on that chapter with what you learned.
Well, I would say that the key insight is that we're hyper social, and the reason that we can cooperate so well is because we're bred for cooperation. And again, culture spread. In other words, we can learn a lot more by downloading the cultural package of those around us than we could in a whole lifetime as an individual. And so we've kind of come to be able to mimic other people, to learn automatically by observing people around us, to figure out who are the best people to learn from, and then to create that as a chain. If I just wanted to learn from you and kind of tell me all the good stuff, and you're like, screw you, it took me a lifetime to get that knowledge, everything would break down. So there's also this kind of really cool thing of prestige that makes people that are good at something they do want to pay it forward and mentor and spread that knowledge out. Otherwise, the chain breaks down. So we're really highly attuned to being culture spreaders, both mimics, as well as teachers.
One thing I really appreciate about the book is one of my favorite chapters was in the back. Chapter 22, talking about conformity and integrity. I hate it when sometimes I find books where my favorite chapter's at the first and I'm slogging through, to get through it. But it's a hot button topic for me because as often as I mention herd mentality, conformity and integrity, how we see people getting pushed into something they feel safe with, something they believe, something that other cultures tell them. Kind of elaborate on the research that you found, what you see, and how you look at conformity, integrity, and how our brains react to that.
Yeah, well, again, I think the key to understanding us is that we're trying for tribal cohesion because we're competing in tribes against other tribes. That's the history of us. So within the tribe, we jockey for social dominance and position, all that mammalian stuff, alpha males or females and such. But being in the tribe and being able to transmit tribal information effectively is kind of at the core. So, we cooperate in tribes. We have an innate sense of fairness that we actually share with apes. So it's kind of like, hey, you have $1, how about I give you 50 cents? Okay, that seems fair. How about I keep 99 and give you a penny? Well, screw you. I'd rather have nothing than to give you 99 cents, right? So they're like, we have an inherent sense of fairness as well. And one of the keys to tribal survival is that their conformity and the need to do what everybody else around us is doing. It's very hard to be an individual. In fact, the very notion that we're individuals, like in Western society, is just an idea that our cultural tribe has snuck into our heads. In reality, it's very hard to stand there and be the only person when everybody else is doing something else. And they're going to put a lot of social pressure on you to conform. And that can take mild forms like just censure or ostracizing people, or banishment, and even killing people that don't follow the rules.
Well, and it also, I think where this is as much of a personal point as it is business, it also affects a lot of your decision making, where you are in business. And so many people do what they've Googled or what is acceptable or a repeat of what they've seen everybody else do, that they just conform to doing the same thing over again. And it's one of the things always argue about with just testing to see what works, not what you think has worked.
Yeah, but on the other hand, as a marketer, there's this notion of trust symbols. So, for example, we're number one. Or McDonald's, they used to have signs on their McDonald's arches, over 99 billion sold. So it's like everybody's doing it, so I should too. Why should I take a risk of going to Wendy's or Fred's Burger down the street? They might not be as good. And so sometimes in business, what you'll find is these things will get started just because of some initial starting conditions. They're not better or not significantly better, but they just kind of the snowball rolls down the hill and everybody, is like, oh, that's the leader. And so everybody should do that. So in order to unseed something in business, you can't be just like 10% better or even 50% better. You have to be, an order of magnitude better before that switch will happen once a leader is locked in.
Mm-hmm. Well, so when you look back at this book, do you think it helps you more now personally or more as a marketer? Because you've been well known as a leader in the space, especially in regards to landing page optimization.
Both. I mean, I think, my whole career was essentially built on applying this. One of my undergraduate majors was in cognitive science. So I've always had an interest in the brain and how it works and persuasion. But on a personal level, it helps me take myself into account better. Maybe that's the best way. I don't have illusions about that. I understand why I do certain things. I don't kick myself in the head as much. If I can't will my way through a certain situation, I can see the strong forces that are acting on me the whole time. And so I have more kind of self-forgiveness, I guess, or let myself off the hook.
Yeah.
So that in itself is kind of freeing. Instead of some arbitrary expectations of how we should be as rational beings, there's the reality of the animals that we are.
Well, to our discussion earlier, especially in regards to marketing and advertising, I do wish that more people would take into account the power they have with their decision making and doing a lot more of the things that we do, whether it's optimizing sites or landing pages. I find it fascinating for those that apply this stuff that really don't understand the backstory behind it and haven't taken the time to learn it. But that's...
Yeah, it shouldn't be a grab bag. I mean, I've seen a lot of these, in behavioral economics, especially, is like, here's the wheel of persuasion. We have 200 tactics you can use to manipulate people. Well, yeah, that's true. But, well, first of all, there are ethical considerations there, but also they're not just random things. They all fit this larger framework. So I'm, again, trying to give people the why behind the way we act. And I think this serves all human beings, not just, improves your business career.
Why do you think you sort of got not boxed in, but why was that the lane that you owned, being, with it being landing page optimization, other than you had a book? I mean, this is not just you. This is all anybody that's authored a book about any field. They sort of get penciled in as that person.
Yeah, well, I think, my own journey through digital marketing, I started early days, shortly after Al Gore invented the interwebs.
Yeah, exactly.
Like 95, we're helping launch new .coms and stuff. One of the things that there's a saying, I think Stephen Covey said it, or what gets measured gets done, right? And the problem is in marketing is what gets measured is the money we spend on media. And so I saw this really disproportionate thing going on, which is like, oh, we spend money on pay-per-click or display ads. And so that's what we're trying to optimize. And then they were sending the traffic to totally crap landing pages and websites. And that's where all the value was. And to me, it's like, you could really cheaply turn the dial on improving your online experience. And then you're multiplying the profitability of every campaign that sends traffic to that website. So to me, it was kind of a tail wagging the dog. And so we were running pay-per-click campaigns, then got into being a super affiliate and spending our own money to drive traffic. And the limiting factor was the quality of the pages we were sending it to. So it was almost like out of necessity, I'm like, get out of my way. Let me help you both of us make more money. That's how I got into conversion rate optimization.
Well, I think one of my biggest fears, and it's why I really enjoyed this book, is that more people should take in the knowledge without necessarily turning everything over to an algorithm. And I don't think nearly enough people really rely on understanding how to use the science rather than just not learning it all and relying on Facebook or Google and trying to trigger everything for them. And that scares the hell out of me.
Let us tune your campaign for you and we'll make the most money and it'll be a black box. Just keep coming back and topping off your account. It's like, yeah, it's a great business model.
Anybody in business that has succeeded, I mean, you're going to make some judgment decisions, and hopefully you'll make more judgment decisions based on whatever science or methods you're using. But
yeah, and I think in general, if you want to be a marketer or in business, you need to understand what you're trying to persuade, which is the human brain. And so instead of focusing on technology, it's like, okay, it's Twitter this and it's virtual reality that. I don't know, tomorrow it's hologram suppositories. I don't know what the next technology is, but it doesn't matter because it's not about the technology. It's about the biology. It's about how we got here. And so if you have that understanding, that level of understanding, you'll understand what channels to use and what tactics to use and even what strategies to use. You're going to have a much more durable and effective career, I believe, as a marketer by understanding the fundamentals. It's not about the new shiny object and new technology.
Well, it's like you said, you're going back to the why of it. Well, Tim, I try to ask this as often as I can. What is your favorite movie of all time?
Oh, wow. The one that just kind of sticks out for me is Saving Private Ryan. I mean,
Really?
it's a
Amazing
pretty,
movie.
yeah, it's a Steven Spielberg movie about World War II. And I'll never forget like the opening sequence of that, the
Oh,
first
yeah.
20 minutes of
They
hitting the
drop
D-Day.
down at
Yeah,
Normandy.
Normandy. Yeah. And boy, those guys had some guts. I can't even imagine being in something
No,
like
it's an amazing movie. Tom Hanks, Matt Damon, Vin Diesel. But my grandfather was there and lost a finger. I don't know how he lived, but
Wow.
he lost a finger and a pitching career. He was a minor league ball pitcher. But
Yeah, my grandfather was on the other side. He survived all 4 years on the Russian front against the Germans in the reconnaissance, carrying a giant field radio and spying on the advancing Germans.
yeah, then that really does make you feel guilty because during a pandemic, I'm condemned to watch TikTok and Netflix, and those are the real sacrifices we're having to make in our modern world.
Well, as far as as long as you're saying that, I have to say that if this is our World War II, we got it easy. So shut up and
exactly.
Put your mask on, please. It's like, seriously, what sacrifice are you making? What freedoms of yours are being impinged upon? Give me a break.
I agree. Well, Tim, I do ask this as well of all of my guests because you're on a shark's perspective with a guy nicknamed Shark who swims with them as often as I can, including in San Diego. What is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Oh, I think the leopard sharks. We have them locally here in San Diego, off the coast in La Jolla, and they're really adorable and they don't bite you. That's my favorite, and they look pretty.
Yeah, the leopard sharks are one of the friendlier sharks. I was just telling a friend of mine that the ones that make everybody feel fairly safe. One of the big ones, though, that you see out there a fair amount as well are the seven gills.
Yep.
Out there.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of those. They put the warning signs out when those guys are around, or the great whites that sometimes come down.
Yeah, the great whites are a lot nastier, but I see a lot of juvenile great whites in that part of the world. Well, Tim, it's that special time in my show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting, important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Hit me, Bubba.
All right, number 1. So this will be a little primal brain-ish. Caveman with Ringo Starr or Clan of the Cave Bear with Daryl Hannah?
I'm sorry, but I'm a cisgender hetero guy. Daryl Hannah anytime.
Yeah, it was a better movie too, and I was a much bigger fan of hers. I couldn't see Ringo. All right, number 2. Being a celebrated author or being a celebrated speaker with your own conference?
Ooh, well, I've done both. You get being a speaker with my own conference only because you get the human connection and you get that energy back from the audience. Being an author is a solitary task.
Yeah, and at least you get to promote the book when you're speaking anyway.
Yeah, so I get to do both. I don't have to choose.
All right, number 4. Another primates question. Planet of the Apes, the newer edition that's been out the last several years, or Planet of the Apes, the old Charlton Heston edition?
Damn you all to hell. Oh, come on. Nothing comes close to the original. I don't care about the bad masks or lack of CGI. Those are just way better movies.
True. Number 4, landing page optimization or neuropsychology?
Landing page optimization is a subset of neuropsychology. So that's why I'm talking about the neuropsychology instead of just the narrow application of it.
Good man. Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread. I have a little bit of a sweet tooth.
Good man. So, Tim, where can people find out more about you, get a copy of the book, hopefully see you speak on a stage again somewhere, either virtually or in person soon?
Yeah. So the information about my speaking and marketing consulting services, including ruthless expert website reviews and telling you your baby is ugly, that's all on timash.com. And the book, which is out in ebook everywhere, audiobook narrated by me, incidentally, Australian edition, and the pre-release autographed copies, you can get it all on my site, primalbrain.com.
How do you say shark in Russian?
Akula.
Akula. Okay, I'll have to remember that.
Akula, roughly transliterated.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Tim, for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
It's my pleasure.
So there was my conversation with Tim Ash, an acknowledged authority on evolutionary psychology and digital marketing, an international keynote speaker, a best-selling author of landing page optimization, and his newest book, Unleash Your Primal Brain. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, this is a really impactful book. You've heard me on other episodes often talk about why we buy in behavioral science, but I love how Tim goes further with this subject into evolutionary psychology. It's the why, as he said, behind a lot of the primal decisions that we make. Good read, and I recommend it. We spend so much time learning hacks and tips and tricks, but digging deeper to why, rather than just looking at a blue pill or a red one, is a much better education and will help you perform better. Second, love the conversation on storytelling. Great example in how someone in Spain may talk about a matador and the bull. I bring this up often with the narrative around politics and cable news networks and shows. The same objective values may or may not reflect the facts. Sometimes it's just the narrative around cultural values. Understanding that is the key to understanding your tribe. Third, Tim simply mentions that as a practitioner, it's important to add some focus to how we got here. It's about understanding more than just the kinds of technical tips and tricks and tactics only. That's the stuff you can Google or see at any conference. Dive deeper though. Get to why. Both you and your customer deserve it. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Shout out to all my Kula friends. You have a primal reason to join us again. Das Vidanya, and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.